Welcome back, guys. Keegan here at Seared and Smoked, and it is a beautiful day in Iowa, and I have these wonderful steaks to talk about and show you everything about. These are some of my favorite steaks of all time, and they just happen to be around $10 or under per pound, usually here in Iowa, maybe a little more if you're other place in the country that are more expensive, but still, these steaks are not expensive. You can eat them on the weeknight very affordably, and with everything I'm gonna teach you, you can make them on the weekend and impress your friends as well. I'm hanging out in a bar and you want to get my attention, let's just ask me what my favorite steak is, or just talk about your favorite steak, and I'm sure we would be off and running. All right, so let's introduce you to the lineup today. Once again, some of my absolute favorites here. We got skirt steak here on the right. Next to that, we got a flat iron steak. We got the classic flank steak, which I've been grilling a long time. And then we have hanger steak next to that. And we got a chuck eye, kind of think like ribeye-ish next to that steak. And then on the end here on my very left, we got the shoulder tender steak. Leaner, nice little cut of meat. And these are all great. So let's talk about each one individually and why they might just be one of your new favorite steaks. All right, our first steak up is our skirt steak. And this is a great steak for a lot of different marinades. You find it often in tacos, things of that nature. And I like it a lot because of the really great flavor. And also it has, if you get a good cut, it has a fair amount of marbling in it. So you can see on both sides, there's some fat on both sides, and that kind of runs through the steak. And I kind of left this one alone until we took a closer look at it, just so I can show you what I typically do with it. And I usually just try to slice off any of the kind of excess fat on the outside, knowing that there's more fat on the interior of the steak. So we'll just kind of slice off any outer bits. If you got any like really loose, rough edges, a little fat on the end, cut that off. So after we have that cut out, we have a nice, usable piece of skirt steak here. And I just want to show you the grain on this. So the grain's running real heavy in this direction. So when you cut it, you want to cut against the grain. So you can either grill it whole, or you can take it in smaller pieces and just cut it, maybe 3 times, and then you have smaller pieces cut up. And I like to do that a little bit just so you have a little more crust on the outside after you marinate it. And the next video after this one, we'll be talking all about marinades for these steaks. I'll give you a great skirt steak marinade for a more of a carne asada type of feel. So great for marinating. Definitely one of my top favorite steaks during the summer, quick and easy. All right, next up is our flat iron steak. This guy is a major player. You don't have to do a whole lot to this steak to make it truly delicious. It's got a nice buttery quality to it no matter what you do to it. And you can see it's got this, these striations kind of running through it. So it's nice and marbled. Sometimes you have this case where you flip it over to the other side and you have kind of a lot of connective tissue running through it. And that's totally okay. I like to feel them. If they're in some sort of package you can touch, like if they're wrapped in a kind of vacuum sealed package, you can kind of feel it to see if it's tough or not. And this one is not, so that's gonna render down and be just extra flavor. But that's one thing you do want to kind of avoid, is ones that if you can touch them, if they're really hard, fatty deposits, try to avoid those. But this is gonna turn into a delicious steak. This is one that you can just use salt and pepper, a little olive oil and rice vinegar as like a simple marinade, or you can do something more complex. In our next video, we're gonna be doing a nice Asian marinade for this one, which I use a lot. Like, not weekly, but I use it at least once a month, this marinade. So I know you'll enjoy that. All right, an old favorite, one that you might be familiar with, flank steak. Still a good price steak, usually at $10 a pound or so here in Iowa. And it's still one of my favorites. It's got like that nice beefy quality to it when you make it. It stands alone by itself. I do tend to marinate it quite a bit just because it does take on marinade really nicely. Once again, it's got the grain going through it. So grain running this way with the flank steak. So you're always slicing against it this way. And I tend to try to slice it on a bias and not real thick. And it'll treat you really nice that way and be nice and tender. This is one in a lot of these steaks that are, on the cheaper end with the grain quality. I tend not to cook them like rare. I'm usually going for medium rare, which is for me taking it off between like 125 and 130 and letting it rest. And it comes out like nice, warm, pinkish reddish in the center. If you undercook these steaks, they can be a little tough. And I think some people made that mistake, you undercook them. Oh, it's a tough steak, that's a bad steak. Not the case, but a lot of these you do have to cook kind of closer to like medium rare, medium, kind of break down some of those tissues a little bit and give you that tenderness you're looking for. But we're gonna do a classic steak marinade in the next video on this one with this flank steak that is out of this world. Still use it all the time. One of my favorites from years ago that I still use. So I look forward to showing you that. All right, maybe one of my favorite steaks ever is the hanger steak. This is, to me, one of the top steaks you can use. It's got so many great qualities. It's got to me, it's almost got the tenderness of a filet, but it has a little marbling of fat. You can see on the outer layer, there's some fat there, and you do have that running through the steak if you get a good quality cut. For all these cuts, I recommend trying to go to a local butcher that has great quality cuts. If you're here in central Iowa, check out the guys over at Old Station Craft Meats in Waukee. That's where I try to get a lot of my meat these days, and they have some really nice cuts. They have your high-end, expensive stuff, but also your steaks like this that you can get for around $10 a pound. So, back to the hanger steak. You can see fairly lean, but has like some nice fat running through it, which is what I like about it. And then you once again notice the grain of the meat running this way with the hanger steak. So you want to know, once again, when you cut it, you want to try to cut against the grain. Otherwise, you're going to have a piece of meat that isn't quite as tender. So if you know how to treat these lower cuts of meat, you're going to get a nice tender cut. If you don't pay attention to where the grain is and the bias of that, then you're going to get a steak that isn't probably to your liking. So pay attention to those things. But this is really one of my favorites. All right, moving on to our chuck eye steak. This is generally a lower priced ribeye. Has a lot of the same qualities. If you look at it, it kind of looks like a smaller ribeye. This is a nice cut. Sometimes they'll have a little more fat running through the center of them when you buy them. That's totally okay, because we're buying this because we want to replicate that beefy, fatty deliciousness of a good ribeye at a little lower cost point, and they're generally a little smaller too, since they're more narrow like this. You can get them thicker cut if you want a thicker than 1 inch, but they're a nice steak for one per person, because a lot of times if you buy a thicker ribeye, it's gonna be 1.5 pounds or so, where you can get a little thicker cut of the chuck eye and still have it be under 1 pound. So if you're making steaks for your buddies or just, family at home, and you just wanna have your own personal size steak and not have it be a monster, this is a good option to get all that flavor, and pairs really well with just a really simple rub. All right, last but not least is our shoulder tender cut, which is really a nice lean piece of meat that is easy to cook. They're a nice size for sometimes an individual serving, depending on how much meat you want to eat, and the size of the steak that they have at the butcher. Usually I find them in this range where they are, maybe kind of in the 8 to 10 ounce range, which is a nice size for a meal. If you're not a petite person, I like to eat a good 9 ounces or more sometimes of steak, and but it's nice and lean, similar to like a filet. Not quite as tender, but still tender, and the grain is just not as heavy running lengthwise. So you slice this guy right against that bias, and you'll have these nice, tender, delectable bites. Great for marinades or a rub. Doesn't need a whole lot of prep because it's already fairly tender and quite delicious. All right, now that we've kind of touched on each individual steak, if we were to group these in a few different ways, I just kind of want to go through some rankings, just so if you're picking out a couple steaks for your liking, then you know what to grab. For me, if you're looking for like the middle of the range, just kind of a buttery, amazing steak that has enough fat in it to give you that flavor but not going overboard, for me, it is the hanger steak and the flat iron. I would go with those two for almost any type of steak as far as marinade versus just salt and pepper. Very simple. You can get away with both those for that, and it'll be great for everything. It's also good, you can also slice these down into thinner pieces if you want to do fajitas and things of that nature, and it'd still be fine. If you're going for something and you just want something a little more, probably towards the healthy side, little, lean, go with your flank steak and your shoulder tender. Those are generally going to be more lean and not have those striations of fat running through it so much. So if you're looking to be a little more healthy, that's the way to go. And the next video I have for you is amazing. It's gonna give you 6 rubs and marinades, 6 total, 3 of each or so, that you can pair with any one of these steaks. So you got 6 steaks, 6 combinations of flavors from rubs and marinades to choose from, and that'll give you an arsenal as we go into this spring to get things done on the grill. Once again, these are great weeknight steaks, but also great on the weekend too if you want to impress people as well with one of these rubs or marinades. So I'm going to give you all those recipes here in this next video, put it up here on the screen for you, and if you roll right into that, we're going to go through all those recipes and cook them up, and we're going to have more steak videos in the next month or 2 here at Seared and Smoked. So definitely subscribe if you haven't already, and you can see all these videos coming up all about steak, because it's one of my very favorite topics. If I haven't alluded that at this point, you know, who doesn't love a good steak? And if you can find great ones at a low price, even better.